Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Tea Time SEO session. Delighted to welcome today two excellent speakers, joining myself and Carrie. And today, in no particular order, I've got Natalie Mott all the way from Preston in Northern England. She's a freelance SEO consultant with a nice pedigree of working for leading agencies in the UK. And from all the way over in Las Vegas, Kristine has joined us. Thank you so much, Kristine. I know it's really early in the morning for you. So we're going to talk today about the impact of Core Web Vitals update. If you're watching this now or you're watching this later on the YouTube channel and you don't know what Core Web Vitals are, where have you been? So start Googling it and watch it later, because this doesn't really touch on the fundamentals of it. But needless to say, it's something that as SEOs we've been preparing for some time. Rolled out in June of this year and sort of completely rolled out by September. And really we want to talk today and get Natalie and Kristine's perspectives on the rollout and what it means for you and your clients. So without further ado, I'll let Natalie and then Kristine introduce themselves, and then Natalie's going to kick us off. So Natalie, over to you.
Thank you, Lawrence. I am Natalie Mott. It says on the screen, I'm an all-rounder in SEO, so I focus on technical on-page and off-site SEO, where some people specialize. I do the whole sort of through-the-line stuff. Been doing this for 13 years. Most of my experience gained agency side, and I've been an independent consultant now for just over 2 years. It's going fairly well. I work with a range of different kinds of clients. So especially on the Core Web Vitals side, I've been working across huge websites with lots of traffic and seeing the impact or lack thereof there. Similarly, with smaller sites that don't have as much field data, it's been quite interesting working on that with lab data alone. So just working on a range of things. And yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Natalie. And Kristine, would you like to introduce yourself? You're just muted yourself, so yep.
Sorry, my computer did that to me. Sorry about that. I'm Kristine Schachinger. I have been doing website stuff for over 20 years. I hate to admit that, but I started as a front-end dev and designer, moved into SEO around 2005. Also do accessibility as one of my other core skill sets. I focus primarily on site recovery, site auditing, new sites, technical SEO, and on-page. I don't do so much with off-page. I have people that help me with that, like link analysis. I've also been an industry writer for almost every industry publication and spoken around the world. Worked with SMBs to enterprise clients. Here's a list of a few of them. And I have been working with PageSpeed since it came out in 2011-ish. So I have very happily moved into Core Web Vitals as it's much more simplified. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, and it's very nice to meet everybody.
Oh, it's great that you're here. I can't believe we've been talking about PageSpeed since 2011, but, or earlier. Okay, so thank you both, and I'll let Natalie take it away.
So, and I'll say a lot of what I'm talking about today is less on the top tips side. So it says top tips. Really, it's a kind of wider discussion about what's happened in the marketplace, but hopefully you'll get some actionable things from my discussion of this. So just the elephant in the room with the title of this talk about the impact of the Core Web Vitals update or the page experience update is that there's a lot of cases where people have been making changes to sites and there's actually not been any impact at all. There's no discernible, meaningful, tangible benefit that quite a lot of SEOs are seeing, which seems to be leading to kind of frustration, disappointment, and apathy in some corners. It's sort of well, what was the point of that then? It was sort of built up as this thing that was going to have a major impact by some people, some commenters in the industry. Google never actually made that build up. That didn't come from Google. As we kind of do in this industry, kind of blow things up out of all proportion sometimes. But the exciting thing about it was that it was this very measurable, clear ranking factor, something, whereas everything that we know about SEO, we know from practice, and there's a lot of correlation, and we know that certain things work and certain things don't. But this is one of the first, along with page speed, is one of the first ones that was actually confirmed as a conclusive ranking factor. So it was very exciting to have something you could actually clearly work towards. And I just think that's where Google always said that it was going to be, just one small part of the algorithm. It was not necessarily going to be something that would cause seismic change. But, I think a lot of people may have been guilty of overstating it to try and get things prioritized in the dev queue. And so you're getting talk at the moment around, well, what was the point of that then? So I just want to talk to that a bit today. The main impact that we see from the update is that it being announced quite far in advance. So, a number of months or maybe even a year, we had an awful lot of warning on this update. It being announced in advance meant that there was an awful lot of talk about it and an awful lot of emphasis placed on trying to improve websites in time for the rollout in June to August. So the main impact that we can see there's a few tools that are measuring this. I prospected a study where they're measuring a certain number of traffic websites. There was a definite shift in the number of sites that are now reporting that are passing the Core Web Vitals assessment. That's one benefit. We've cleaned up the web a bit, but in terms of actual SEO impact, Carrie, can you move on to the next couple of slides? So that's we can see that there is a notable difference in the number of percentage point changes between the end of May and now. Now we're seeing 33% of the sites in that study as good. So that's sort of the practical application. But it's been very difficult to pinpoint the impact of this update because it rolled out at the same time as some major algorithmic changes. So 2 core updates, which are a lot of the results of those were sort of reversing things that had happened in the core update in the previous November, and then some spam updates. So the 4 major things that were announced by Google at the same time as the page experience update, doing that phase rollout from June to August. And then all of the micro algorithm changes that are occurring. It's just very, very difficult to say for certain that it's the page experience update that has caused certain uplifts for certain sites. It's quite frustrating that it's not been possible to look at the impact of that in a vacuum. But there are some studies that are trying to kind of untangle that complexity. There's a study by Systrix where there have been some, the conclusion there is that in general, sites that have got better Core Web Vitals are performing better. On balance, if everything's equal, on balance, they're performing better than sites that have got poor Core Web Vitals. But then, of course, you've got so many outliers. And like anything in SEO, when we talk about all things being equal and things being on balance, it's rare that that's the case. So it's another one of those complex things. If you're agency side and you get asked by a client, what impact, or indeed actually when you're in-house and being asked by other stakeholders, what impact will this specific SEO change bring to me? You'll know that it's often very hard to quantify, and Core Web Vitals is another one of those. In my experience, it's been another one of those things that's been still hard to kind of push through. But we are where we are with it. If I can, sorry, Carrie, can I just say one more thing on this? The important thing. I'm just making sure I've said everything I wanted to. So say you're in a position where your page speed insight scores are saying that your site is still failing the assessment, for example. One of the things you need to take into account that failing the assessment, it's as much as it seems that it's binary, it's kind of not. There's lots of examples of sites that are quote unquote failing the assessment, but it's by milliseconds or just a couple of percentage points, and it's not having a negative impact on them at all. partly because of the strength of the brand. So there's the likes of Next and Marks and Spencer's, both failing the assessment, but only by saying their largest contentful paint is 4 seconds when it should be slightly less than that to go into needs improvement. It's kind of, it kind of doesn't matter in practice that the largest contentful paint is 4 seconds for the likes of Next and Marks and Spencer. So that's one thing I'd say about prioritizing these fixes for your own website. If you are the likes of Next and Marks and Spencer and you have bigger fish to fry, there's a possibility that there's a reason why passing the core web vitals wouldn't be the highest priority when everything else is going so well. But if you're in a situation where your brand is, it's one of the main things that you can compete against the competition on, it could be a source of competitive advantage, then it should be a no-brainer. These are things that still should be a priority to fix. Sorry, next slide, please, Carrie. So I've been talking about Next and M&S sort of being outliers in this, and the important thing to note here is kind of a misconception that, or it might have been a misunderstanding in some quarters of the industry, that you could be penalised for having poor core web vitals. It's not the case, and there's these clear examples of it just not being the case because of the strength of these brands. So really, this is just to show that there are outliers in this story of sites with the good core web vitals outperform others, because you've got the likes of Next and M&S that fly in the face of that. But then you can also see here the origin summary here. Although that first input delay is fairly high, you definitely want to drive that down. You can see that the difference in LCP and CLS is just over what it needs to be to pass, and I would say that it's probably one of the reasons why Next is still succeeding, and all of the other factors that could come into algorithm changes anyway. In contrast, you have some larger similar sized brands that have, sorry, Carrie, can you go back to, I was just making a point about, in contrast to M&S and Next, you have John Lewis and Argos that sort of did all the right things, and so they are these huge brands that just as huge as Next and M&S, but they did all the right things, and they are also benefiting from this update. I'm sorry, I'm quite confused because these slides are going all over the place. Well, the point I'm trying to make here is that there are brands that have done all the right things and are also reaping the benefits from this. So for every Next and M&S you also have a John Lewis and an Argos, so you can show the clear benefits of still working towards this if you have the development capacity. Next slide, please, Carrie. So that's just to show that John Lewis had, they did work on their core web vitals metrics. The last slide shows that, and here they also benefited from the updates within May, June, and July. So in a roundabout way, I'm basically trying to say that if all other factors are equal, they never are. But generally speaking, I strongly advise that dev and product and marketing teams should still be working together to improve these metrics. As I said earlier, there are studies that are concluding that it's just better to do this. Sites with stronger core web vitals on balance are ranking better than those weak ones. And if there's, because I can understand that there'll be situations where you're being asked to prove the ROI of these kinds of changes. And with SEO forecasting, so many of these things are subject to external factors and all kinds of things outside of our control. So if it's just about getting it on the dev schedule, if proving it in terms of potential traffic uplift is difficult, which it will be, talking about improvements in conversion rate could also be another way to keep it on the agenda. Because although we might not be able to sell this as this thing that's going to absolutely revolutionize our site's visibility. We know that improving page speed and these user experience metrics are designed to have an impact on, on user experience and conversion rate metrics. So that could be another way to keep it in the agenda. Yeah, that was my part.
That's great, Natalie. Thanks for that. So kind of saying that, you know, there are some good examples where performance has improved and metrics have improved, but there's also equally some examples where performance has improved and metrics haven't changed very much or aren't particularly good. Obviously, you know, this is just one. There's been lots of algorithm updates, so it's kind of difficult to look at it in a vacuum. But I think your last point,
almost impossible.
Yeah, but I think that's true of any algorithm change, obviously, when there's 200 ranking factors, but as we all know. But I think the interesting point there is that, you know, the last point about conversion rates alone, I mean, gosh, we've seen so many stats, you know, a 1%, oh no, 1 second change in page time, or you know, a slow page, if it's slow by another second, it adds or decreases your conversion rate by 7% or whatever for every second. You've seen all these kind of stats everywhere. So that alone should certainly get most e-commerce sites thinking about doing it, if not for the ranking benefits. Well, look, that's great. So thank you for that background. I think, Kristine, I know you're going to build on that now by talking about up valuation and down valuations and what have you. So it's straight over to you. Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie. Natalie gave a great overview of the state of Core Web Vitals. I'm going to get into a little more details with a case example as well. So some things, like Natalie's already mentioned, there is no devaluation for Core Web Vital negatives. So if you're all in the red, you're not going to get a devaluation like you did with page speed. Page speed actually did have a devaluation component. So especially in core updates. So if you had a very slow page speed, you were doing just fine, and suddenly a core update would come out and you would crash and your page speed improved, then you would get your recovery. I do a lot of site recoveries. For me, it's a little easier to see results because I do a lot of site recoveries. I am often operating in a vacuum, which means we're only doing one major fix at a time, and it's related to an update. So if I only work on page speed and then Core Web Vitals with a client and an update comes out, then I know that's actually what caused it, because the page speed and Core Web Vital updates are separate from all the other updates. So anyway, so people know that you don't have to be all in the green to get a benefit from the Core Web Vitals. You can be in the yellow as well. You just can't be in the red. Google needs 75% of your pages to meet the metrics inside the developer docs. By the way, if you have developers, make sure they have these developer docs, because it has very specific instructions on thresholds that you need to meet the yellows and the greens, and they tell you exactly what it is. Real world metrics create your Core Web Vital status. So when the lockdowns with all the COVID breakouts and stuff, that might affect your Core Web Vitals, because your users went from offices to home environments where they may in the US have a much slower speed. I know overseas it's much better. US broadband at home is much slower than your work environment. So if 75% of your users suddenly were on a decreased slower connection, then you might see your Core Web Vitals change, but nothing on your site actually changed. So it doesn't mean your site's always changed. So you want to also make sure you look at real world environment issues as well as the actual page speed. Scores are assessed on a rolling basis over 30 days. So if you make improvements today and you roll them all out, you should start seeing improvements to them on a daily basis over 30 days. Is it an instant? I don't know. They say it is, but I don't always see it being instant. Like the next day it starts, but it does start within that 30-day time frame, because they do these every 30-day full rollouts. They're also assessed at the page and site level. So the client I'm going to show you, we were working on their page speed, but we also took off 7 years of, they had 7 years of the site had ads on it that produced no revenue. So we took off all the ads off those 7 years of pages, and that resulted in one of the page bumps I'm going to show you. Now that was under page speed, not Core Web Vitals, but it did have us prepped for Core Web Vitals. Developers, some real quick information. Don't have your developers looking at Google Search Console and trying to develop to the ups and downs in there. If they develop on the Google recommended fast 3G, slow 4G with a Nexus 5X mobile device, if they develop to that standard, they'll almost always be in the green. There's very little chance that your users are going to be slower than fast 3G, slow 4G. If your site, I already said scores are assessed on a rolling basis. So I have a theory on why Google did what they did real quick. It's just my theory, could be totally wrong, but Google had page speed for a decade. It had page speed on mobile since 2018. Most SEOs ignored it because they thought it was a tiebreaker, but the tiebreaker is at the query level. So I would do page speed up changes. There'd be some sort of related update with page speed, and I would get on one site, we got 200,000 visits a day from overnight from page speed improvements because it's at the query level. So if you had a large site that had hundreds of thousands of queries, yeah, sure, it's a tiebreaker, but on tens of thousands of queries, that could result in tens of thousands of visits. Smaller sites, not as impactful, but that being the case, so your site scores, CWVs, or on your former page speed are all assessed at both levels. So anyway, next one. So I got ahead of myself, as I sometimes do in my slides, but I have never worked with a client in the past decade where we massively improved page speed. And I don't mean you went from 4 seconds to 2 seconds. I'm talking about sites that were like over 8 and 10 seconds, where we got them down to like a 4-second DOM load and not seeing a great increase. That being said, I'm not seeing that same sort of boom effect with the core web vitals so far, which I think is going to become a problem for Google, because I was looking at a lot of talk this week, and as Natalie already mentioned, people are frustrated. They did all this work. They're not getting much result. So people aren't necessarily, I don't think, going to keep going with it if they think they're doing all this work for no effect. And so if Google wanted to gamify it, they forgot the part about the reward. Under page speed, I could get 100% increase overnight on a page speed update. Now we're talking on the end of core web vitals, 20%. 30%, which if you're a huge site, that's a big deal. If you're a smaller site, not so much. This is a site that I was talking about. When we started, they got hit by a core web vital. A core update. I'm getting it's really early for me, people. It's 8:30 in Las Vegas. And I had my booster shot yesterday, so bear with me. But so they were on a 2-minute page load time, but doing amazing traffic. And a core update went through, killed their traffic like 80%. Because their page speed was 2 minutes. So we had been working with them for 2 years by the time that the core web vital had come out. So they were instantly all in the green, because they'd already been optimizing more of the site with page speed than you do with the core web vitals. So this is them all in the green. They were all in the green about 2 months before they announced the core web vital update change coming out. So 98.9% of their URLs are in the green zone. Actually, it was 99.9%, so I have to send them an email because that just changed. But as they assess it on a daily basis, you can change on a daily basis. I wouldn't chase a 1% or 2% change. I'm just ask my client to make sure that no mistakes have happened. But if you see a 5%, 10% drop, then obviously you're starting to have some problems. Maybe somebody put a hero image on a bunch of pages. I had a client who insisted on putting these MP4 graphics that weighed 20 megabytes. So they went from 100% to 0 good page speed, right? So if you start seeing large declines, you definitely want to check that out. And then this is that client. So the first two are, I think I have a mistake in there. It's not updates, it's updates. Those were 2 page speed bumps. So one was a core update and one was like strictly page speed, like unknown update. But they were down around 5,000, went up to about 8,000, 9,000 a day. Then they had a slight decrease in there for a while, but a whole bunch of people did right around the core web vitals started. So no one was really sure why that happened. I haven't seen an explanation. But then we got another bump. So we're up to 13, 15,000 a day visits. And as you can see, one of the ways you can tell you got an up valuation is you hold the valuation. So if it's just your site traffic or seasonality, you're going to have ups and downs and ups and downs. But if you look at your lows at the bottom, you can see that your bottoms aren't dropping down to where you were. They're staying about the same. And then you'll have your increases. So on this one, we can see that they had 3 significant bumps, going from an average of like 4,000 to 5,000 visits a day to 13,000 to 15,000 visits a day, 2 from page speed, 1 from core web vitals. And the next one. And we can see here, this is 3 months now, 3 months last year. They didn't get their first bump until the end of last year. They've gone up 480,000 clicks over these 3 months and 39.9 million impressions. The only thing we've worked on is page speed and core vitals. And because this site is a news site, most things stay fairly consistent, like how many articles they put out a day, who writes the articles, inbound links. There's no major changes on anything that would move the needle that much. And given that we know the increases were also during updates, and we had been working on the page speed, I can feel pretty confident that this is why they got the bumps that they got. And so why should you care? Natalie went over this a little bit, and I know people are really discouraged right now. I'm like, I don't even know if I want to bother with this, because it is always hard to get developers to buy in. If your competitors are doing it and you're not, when they're assessing these, you may actually drop. So you don't get a devaluation anymore. So Google didn't come by and give you lower score on your ranking, on your site score. But what it does do is your competitors went up because they did do it and you went down. So if you do lose position, you might want to look and see, do you have a core vital issue? Google is going to be changing these metrics over time. They're treating it as a living process. So they could also increase the reward for getting it right. Right now, there's only 3 metrics that aren't. It's a little difficult to me, but not that hard. So they might make it more competitive and then increase the reward going forward. I don't know that for a fact, but I do know from the pages on this in Google Developer Docs that they are treating it as a living environment that could change frequently, and they even have a change log for you to follow. So they could be more important. Also, as we already mentioned, CWVs help reduce bounce rates and increase site stickiness and conversions. So if someone gets to your site, we all know that site that you don't visit anymore, because it's like, I know the minute I go into that site, it's just going to be add, long, takes forever to load, everything jumps around. I don't go to that. Google's product isn't Google search results. Google's product is what sites it serves through the search results. So if your site is one of those sites that annoys users, people start believing Google to be a bad search engine. So if they want to be a good search engine, they have to produce sites that make users want to stay on those sites. And so that's part of what they wanted, I think, gamify with CWV. And the other thing is, crawling and indexing the internet is really, really, really expensive for Google. They even had to build a dam next to the data center in Kentucky because they had to cool it. So my feeling is the reason they changed from the 10 years of page speed, which nobody bothered with because they thought it was just a tiebreaker, to which you learn differently when you do site recoveries, to CWVs is to gamify it. They give you a dashboard, and now CEOs are going to see that, and marketing directors, and they're going to want you to get those page speeds down because that's important to them. And you can tell them a million ways to Sunday it's not important, and they're still going to think it's important because there's a red thing there, right? So this helps Google reduce their amount of money they spend on crawling and indexing the web. They do trillions of pages a year now, right? So if they can get you to make sites easier and for users, then that looks like they're a good search engine. And if you can get you to lower the amount of resources that they have to crawl to index your site, it decreases their costs. Because they don't care who gets the top 1 spot, right? They just care that it's a good site that gets the top spot. So that's my feeling on why they're pushing this so hard. And again, I don't have anything to 100% back that up. It's just things I've heard in Google's talks outside of SEO about needing to reduce their crawling and indexing costs. So if you make it easier for Google, they'll make it better for you. Ta-da!
Well, that's great, Kristine. I must agree with your last comment there. It's not the first time Google would have pushed something out that also, works well for them. And saves crawl budget and resources. Obviously, when you're trawling trillions of links, even for someone with as pockets as Google, every kilobyte saved is cents saved. So that's brilliant perspective on things there as well. And obviously, when you're working with lots of site recoveries as you have, obviously, it gives you a slightly different perspective on some of these things. Just the case that you showed there with the really big improvement in page visits. So was that the site, was that a new site, or was that the site that was 2 minutes loading before?
2 minutes. All the graphs are from the same site. Okay. So when I started,
it really is really terrible user experience to really good user experience. And that's the magnitude that can happen in a case where someone really, clearly page speed and the page experience is a problem for them. Once you've rectified that, obviously the benefits are profound.
They were under page speed. I don't know as much under core vitals. I still am only seeing like 20 to 30% increases. Yeah. But the going from 2 minutes to what we did under page speed definitely would have that kind of increase. Going from 20 seconds to under 10 seconds had that kind of increase. So it was just like Google had this weird threshold of like 10 to 11 seconds for the page load, because I had a site that always hovered at like 9 or 12. And every time they were under 10, they would get better. And every time they were over 12 or 10, they would get worse. So that was like this weird line during page speed days, but that's not necessarily the same now.
Perfect. Well, look, we're pushing up for time now, so I know you've got an online pub to go to or something, and a cat to go to the vet. Have you got time for a couple of questions from the audience and a few from me, hopefully? So, Carrie, have we got anything that you want to throw Natalie and Kristine's way? Carrie, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry about that. So we have a question here from the audience. Was there one major change that you made that had a big impact on page speed? I guess this can go to both of you. Have either of you seen anything?
Yeah, for me, and I wrote an article on it once, the biggest thing you can do is look at your images. For the site you just saw, a major part of their problem was their images weren't optimized at all, and they were loaded at full megabytes. So once we took that off the page, that was a very, a massive change, and it's one that anybody can look at and anyone can do. And the developers can do it fairly simply with certain tools, and you just have to make sure you do it not on the fly. That means like compress it on the fly. Google doesn't look at that compression, so you have to make sure that the actual load is changed when it's uploaded to the site.
So serve your images using a CDN like Cloudinary or other. There's obviously other products out there. And we've certainly can confirm we've seen those kind of changes. What about Natalie?
Those help. These are more like actually changing the page weight, the weight of the images, because they were so large. They were like 5 to 20 megabytes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Natalie, what about your perspective?
I agree that image sizing is probably the most frequently useful thing to address. I have not much more to say on that. There's the other elements like minifying JavaScript and CSS, but the most painless, effective improvement you can make to page speed always relates to images.
Okay. All right, great. I've got a couple of questions, Carrie, unless there's any more. When you're tackling a problem, and I might just, for sake of argument, Kristine, you can just pick a site that's possibly, it's not obvious that they've got a problem in this area, but if a site is, I don't know, the SEO's persuaded the marketing director or the CEO to put some budget into Core Web Vitals, where do you normally start? How do you look at the problem? What's the most efficient way to tackle it at site-wide? So do you look at key landing pages? Do you look at page templates? Do you look at another, systematic site-wide issues? How do you come at it? What would your approach be?
I always start with crawling tools. Okay. So I have two crawler tools that I use, and one of them assesses CWVs very well. And so I use that information. I also do full site crawls. A lot of people don't. I find that on recoveries, I need to do full site crawls because there's anomalies that are causing the site issue that you wouldn't see on a sample crawl. So if there's 10 million pages to that site, I'm crawling 10 million pages and looking for the issues. But that also helps you identify CWVs pretty easily, because you can see, like, in the crawl, I have 1 million pages that have an LCP issue. I have 2 million pages that have this. So then or I have 5 pages that have this. So that's really not a big deal. And if I was only looking at one page, I might think this is a problem for the whole site, but it's not, because I'm not going to waste resources on, an enterprise level on a 5-page issue unless it's like the homepage, or something super crucial. So that's usually how I address it. That's how I start it, is to do the crawls.
You couldn't sort of minimize the time or the resources by maybe picking the predominant sort of page templates for a 10 million page site. You go gung-ho, you're my kind of girl, get big data, basically, get everything, get as much as you can. Okay, let the machines do the work. What about you, Natalie?
I'm the same. I always try to, as much as people might encourage me to think about it on a template level, or just say, oh yeah, these sites are exactly the same, the only thing that's different is X, Y, and Z. I've never believed that. And I will always try and obtain a full crawl of a website, even if you're in loggerheads with database admins and people like that. No, it's absolutely vital that you get that data. But in terms of approaching in if an effective way of definitely get all the data, so you know where all the outliers are and where all the commonalities are. But then in terms of chunking the work down, it usually does make sense to do it on a template level, or if you've done the full analysis on a sort of an issues level. So if you see this depends on the way the developers want to approach the work often. But that's two ways you could approach it.
Okay,
And I do what Natalie just mentioned. I do it on an issues level, and then I give them the spreadsheets of the URLs that have the problems. So.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So let's go. Take yourself forward. You've just sorted out this website. You've got your big your monthly check for sorting them out. They're delighted. You've had a great conversation with them because you've increased their visits by 200,000 visits the next day or whatever. And then obviously that CMSs these days make it very easy for Tom, Dick, and Harry, anybody, to update the website. So 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, how do you stop regression issues happening? Any tips or techniques for people to watching to stop your clients or your in-house team undoing all your hard work?
Sometimes I let them make the mistake.
Okay.
So the one that got the 200,000, they actually get 250,000 visits a day, but it settled in at about 180, 200,000 a day. And 6 weeks in, we were down 20%. And then day 2, we were down 40%. And then day 3, we were down 60%. So I wrote the head of tech and I said, what did you guys do to the website? Because this was a millions of pages of website. There's no way for me to easily check. And they said, oh, well, we were doing so well, we put all the ads back on the site. I said, the 14 ads per page that we told you to remove because of page speed? Yeah. Well, not only did I spend 6 hours on the day that we got the bump trying to convince the CTO that that's why we got the bump, I had to spend a week getting them to convince that the reason now we're down and we lost 60% of our gain is because they put on all the ads back on the site. But once they put the things back on, took the things back off, they're like 2 weeks later, like, why didn't we get a bump? I go, oh no, it doesn't work that way. We made a massive improvement, so we got a big reward. Now we've messed up again really quickly after we fixed it. So it's gonna be a long time before that reward comes back. Google doesn't like to give you rewards twice in like 2 months for the same thing. But by making that mistake, and then when they saw it come back up about 2-3 months later, they never argued with me again about the necessity of page speed or the need to reduce ads on the site. So sometimes you can talk till you're blue in the face. You can give them all the evidence. You can have John Mueller said this. You can say Google said this, and they still push back. And at that point, sometimes it's just better to let them do what they feel they need to do, and then show them why that was an error when the error happens.
Gotcha.
As long as you cover yourself and you let them know why it's a problem, so you don't get blamed for it later.
Perfect. And Natalie, from your perspective, any advice you give people to try and prevent these regression, which is inevitable regression in some areas, I presume, with so many people touching the website or keeping tabs on it?
Yeah, I know in my experience, and it's so frustrating this is the way, but you do end up having different stakeholders pushing, so different areas of the business pushing for different things. And as much as the SEO or the marketing person probably does want similar things to the dev and the product people, we want to make the website better. Nobody's trying to make anyone's job harder. But just so often those departments are at odds with each other. I don't think I've had an experience where I've avoided rollbacks or regression or any kind of, it happens all the time. So really, I just kind of like to try and advocate for just education, good relationship building across the disciplines. Try and get everyone on the same page. Try and get everyone to understand what everyone is working to. It's so difficult to do, but I would always try and advocate for that, to try and just make sure everyone's working towards the same kind of utopian ideal. It sounds so silly, but that's
no, it's true. Internal education is a huge part of what I do. I get them to let me give trainings. I give documents over that do best practices. I talk to people who are invested and try to get them all to talk to each other, because usually SEO is isolated or added on at the end, and I try to get them moved into the beginning of all the stages. So that helps, but still there's always going to be that one group or one person inside the company who just pushes back. And at that point, like I said, sometimes you just have to let them do what they're going to do, because all you're doing is fighting with them, and that just makes them dig in harder. So.
Okay, well, look, I think we could probably go on talking about, I've got a million other questions I could ask you about the intricacies of page speed and what have you, but I think one thing we can all agree on is Google's pushing this out for a reason. To your point, Kristine, it may be gamifying it for its own benefit as much as anything. But that's going to help us as SEOs push this out to our clients and, and improve things for users ultimately, and hopefully drive better SEO results and drive better conversions on e-commerce sites and so on and so forth. So I'd probably leave it there for today. Thank you ever so much for your time. And if you go back a couple of slides, Carrie, just for everyone who's online, there's a couple of resources here, which we put together, which is quite fun. Kristine and I were working on that slide simultaneously across the Atlantic earlier. So there's some great resources there. Reflect Digital did some nice industry reports using our page speed tools. So check those out. Some nice things on top e-commerce sites. Backlinko done just an interesting piece of research, I thought, on Core Web Vitals and UX, but not really saying there was much correlation there yet. There's a Core Web Vitals Chrome extension. If you haven't seen it, it just puts in the Core Web Vitals against the search listings as you're searching on Google. Came across this tool yesterday, which is waterfaller.dev. Which is quite interesting in that it takes a slightly different take on just implementing the Lighthouse API, in that it summarizes the epics, the problems in terms of epics and stories that you can then copy and paste straight into Trello or Jira and give to your engineers, and they're written as sort of like stories for developers, which I thought was really quite nice. Of course, we've web page test. There's lots of other tools out there. We've got our own page experience tool. What we do is check the Lighthouse API in bulk. So for the kind of people that like lots of data, like me and Kristine and Natalie, it's great. You can do your own industry reports, upload 100 competing URLs, upload the SERPs, the competitors you're competing for in the SERPs. But if you're also optimizing your site, you can make changes, run a report, annotate it, rate changes, run a report, and keep track record of what's happening, and keep those nice graphs there, hopefully moving up and to the right generally, showing how you've moved the page experience forward. So that's it from me. That's it from Natalie and Kristine. Just go back one slide. There's their Twitter details there, so you can contact them there. Anytime you can contact us, either in the Optimizers community or online. We'll be back for Tea Time SEO next month. I think it's the 25th of November, for more SEO advice on another interesting topic of the day, possibly some tea and definitely some cake. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.